Snow fell in slow spirals, glittering under the amber glow of the streetlights. The night before Christmas had a strange stillness to it, one that wrapped the small town in a hush so deep it almost felt sacred. Daniel Cole's old Ford truck rumbled quietly down the nearly empty road, its tires crunching over the thin layer of frost that blanketed Main Street. He rubbed his hands together, trying to bring life back into his stiff fingers as the heater wheezed out lukewarm air. The radio played a soft, crackling version of Silent Night, but even that felt heavy tonight. It had been one of those days that stretched far beyond its hours. 12 non-stop deliveries, icy steps, people yelling over missing packages. His shoulders ached, his knees burned. But what hurt most was the quiet thought at the back of his mind, Ethan's face when he'd left that morning. His little boy had stood at the window, pajamas wrinkled, hair messy, holding the small drawing he'd made of the two of them standing beside a Christmas tree with a star so big it touched the clouds. "Dad," Ethan had said softly, "are we still gonna have Christmas dinner?" Daniel had forced a smile and ruffled his hair. "Of course, buddy. Might not be fancy, but we'll have something good." The lie had rolled off his tongue easier than he expected. The truth was, the fridge held only a half carton of milk, 2 eggs, and a can of soup. Rent was due in a week, and his last paycheck had already disappeared into bills. The holidays had always been tough since his wife died 5 years ago, but this year, it felt heavier, like the world had decided to press its full weight on his chest. The light turned red, and the truck idled. Daniel leaned back in his seat, closing his eyes for a moment. His breath fogged the glass. The town was quiet except for the distant ringing of church bells and the faint chatter of people hurrying home with shopping bags, laughter spilling into the cold. He wanted to feel happy for them, but all he felt was empty. When the light turned green, he shifted gears and rolled forward. That was when he saw them. A figure, small and fragile-looking, huddled near the entrance of Miller's Bakery. A woman crouched low, her arms around 2 children who were pressed tightly to her sides. They were sitting beneath the flickering awning light, surrounded by melting snow. A cardboard sign leaned against a half-empty plastic cup. "Hungry. Please help. God bless." Daniel's stomach twisted. He drove a few yards past them before slowing down. He'd seen plenty of beggars before, some scammers, some addicts, but there was something about this scene that rooted him to the spot. Maybe it was the way the woman kept her head bowed, her dark hair matted with snow, or the way she rubbed her children's hands to keep them warm. Maybe it was the faint tremble in her shoulders. He pulled over. For a moment, he just sat there, the wipers squeaking across the windshield. He didn't know why he couldn't drive away. He told himself he couldn't afford to help anyone, he barely had enough for his own family. But as he looked at those 2 small children, their thin coats and shivering bodies, his chest ached. With a sigh, he turned off the engine, grabbed the thermos of lukewarm coffee sitting in the cup holder, and stepped into the cold. The wind bit at his face. As he approached, the woman's head jerked up. Her eyes widened slightly, tired eyes, ringed with sleeplessness but still sharp with a mother's instinct to protect. The twins, maybe 5 or 6 years old, pressed closer to her. One had a red scarf that was far too thin, the other clutched a broken toy car in his gloved hands. "Hey," Daniel said quietly, crouching a few feet away. "You okay out here?" The woman hesitated. "We're fine," she said, though her voice trembled. "Just waiting." He looked at the sign, then at the children. "You've been waiting long." She glanced at the cup. "Since morning. We thought the bakery might give us something, but they closed early for the holidays." Daniel's throat tightened. "Do you have somewhere to stay tonight?" She shook her head. "The shelter's full. They said to come back tomorrow. We'll manage somehow." Her words were calm, almost resigned, but the look in her eyes told another story, one of exhaustion and quiet despair. Daniel remembered that look. He'd seen it in the mirror after his wife's funeral, when he'd stood in his tiny apartment with a baby in his arms, wondering how he'd survive. He unscrewed the thermos and held it out. "Here," he said. "It's not much, but it's warm." She blinked at him in surprise. "I can't." "Please," he insisted. "I've got more at home." After a moment, she took it, hands trembling. She gave it to her children first, watching as they each took a careful sip. The boy smiled faintly and whispered, "Thank you, mister." That single, small voice undid something in Daniel. He looked at the woman again. "What's your name?" "Grace," she said softly. "And these are Eli and Emma." "Grace," he repeated, testing the sound of it. I'm Daniel. She nodded, offering a tired, polite smile. Thank you for stopping, Daniel. Most people just walk past. He stared at her for a long moment, the snow settling in her hair, the faint tremor in her lips as she forced that smile. Something about her seemed familiar, like a song he couldn't quite remember the words to. Come on, he said finally. You can't stay out here. It's below freezing. Grace's eyes widened. We'll be okay, really. I don't want to trouble you. It's no trouble, he said, shaking his head. I've got a couch, a heater, and some soup. It's not much, but it's better than this. She looked torn, her gaze darting from him to her children. You don't even know us, she whispered. I don't have to, he said. It's Christmas Eve. No one should be out in the cold tonight. Her lips parted, and for a heartbeat, she said nothing. Then she nodded slowly. Okay. Daniel helped them up, his hands steadying the twins as they stood. The girl clung to his coat sleeve, her small fingers like ice. He opened the truck door and waited as Grace helped her children climb in. They huddled together, the heater blasting warm air that fogged up the windows. As Daniel got behind the wheel, the boy murmured sleepily, "It's warm, Mommy." Grace turned to him, her face illuminated by the dashboard lights, and whispered, "Say thank you, Eli." "Thank you," the boy said, and Daniel felt a lump rise in his throat. He drove in silence, the roads quiet except for the hum of the tires and the faint breathing of the children. Grace sat beside him, her hands clasped tightly, eyes watching the snowy blur outside. After a while, she spoke. "You're kind, Daniel. I wish there were more people like you." He smiled faintly. "I'm just doing what I hope someone would do for me." For a long moment, neither spoke. Only the soft glow of the truck lights filled the cab, the snow swirling outside like falling stars. And as they turned into the narrow lane that led to his apartment, Daniel felt something strange stir in his chest, something warm and unfamiliar, like a memory calling from far away. He didn't know it yet, but this Christmas Eve would change everything. The apartment smelled faintly of pine and instant noodles, the scent of a home that had been trying its best to be festive despite having almost nothing. Daniel pushed the door open with his shoulder, holding it for Grace and her children as they stepped inside. The warmth from the small space hit them. Instantly, not much, but enough to thaw the sting of the night air. The living room was barely big enough for the threadbare couch, a wobbly coffee table, and the small artificial tree that stood in the corner. Ethan had decorated it himself that morning, hanging paper stars and crooked candy canes from its branches. The star on top leaned sideways, but it glowed softly, giving the room a golden light that made everything feel gentler than it was. Ethan looked up from where he'd been sitting cross-legged on the floor, flipping through a second-hand comic book. When he saw the strangers behind his dad, his eyes widened in surprise. "Dad," he asked, "who are they?" Daniel hesitated for a heartbeat. "These are some friends, buddy. They didn't have anywhere to go tonight. We're going to help them out, okay?" Ethan's expression changed instantly. He jumped up and ran to the linen closet. "I can get blankets," he said. "And I can share my bed. It's Christmas Eve. Everyone should have a bed." Grace watched him quietly, her eyes shining with something between gratitude and disbelief. He's a sweet boy." Daniel smiled faintly. "Yeah, he's got more heart than sense sometimes." While Ethan proudly showed the twins his small bedroom, Grace stood near the doorway, rubbing her arms as if unsure whether to relax. Daniel gestured toward the kitchen. "You can sit. I'll warm something up." She followed him, though her gaze wandered around the apartment, the stack of mail on the counter, the tiny fridge with magnets shaped like animals, the small photo of a smiling woman with Daniel and Ethan beside her. Grace's eyes lingered on that picture longer than she meant to. "Your wife?" she asked softly. Daniel nodded, stirring the pot of soup he'd set on the stove. "Yeah, she'd passed 5 years ago. Cancer." "I'm sorry," Grace murmured. "Me too," he said simply. "But I had Ethan. That's what kept me going." The twins came bounding in a few minutes later, wearing Ethan's old pajamas. They were a little big, but their laughter filled the kitchen like sunlight breaking through clouds. Daniel poured soup into bowls, the last cans he'd been saving for tomorrow, and set them on the table. "It's not fancy," he said apologetically, "but it's warm." Grace shook her head. "It's perfect." For the first time that night, the apartment was filled with the sounds of spoons clinking, children whispering between giggles, and Ethan telling stories about how he'd once caught a snowflake on his tongue that tasted like magic. Grace smiled as her kids ate hungrily, watching them as if seeing them full for the first time in weeks. Daniel watched too, feeling an ache in his chest that wasn't entirely sadness. There was something profoundly right about it, the way the room felt alive again, as if this family had been missing pieces of each other without knowing it. When dinner was done, Ethan insisted on showing the twins his paper snowflakes and the small gifts under the tree, a wrapped box of crayons, a toy car, and a knitted scarf he'd made for his dad at school. Grace laughed softly, brushing a strand of hair from her face as she watched her children playing. It was late by the time Daniel managed to get the kids tucked in. Ethan had insisted the twins take his bed, claiming he liked sleeping on the couch anyway. They were asleep within minutes, small faces peaceful under the old blankets. Grace stood by the window, watching the snow drift outside, the streetlights painting the world in white and gold. The silence between her and Daniel was comfortable but full of something unspoken. "You really didn't have to do all this," she said quietly. He shrugged. "Maybe not. But I wanted to." She turned, studying him. "Why? You don't even know us." Daniel thought for a moment, then said, "I guess because I know what it's like to need someone and have no one stop to help." Grace's expression softened. She walked to the small table, fingers brushing the framed photo again. "You said your name's Daniel Cole." He looked up, curious. "Yeah, why?" Her lips parted slightly, her breath catching. For a moment she just stared at him, her eyes wide as if she was seeing something she hadn't expected. "You don't recognize me, do you?" He frowned, studying her face, the gentle curve of her jaw, the dark eyes that looked faintly familiar. "Should I?" Her voice trembled. "I'm Grace Walker. We went to college together. You dated my sister, Hannah." The world seemed to stop. Daniel blinked, unable to breathe for a moment. "Hannah," he repeated, the name heavy with old memories. "Hannah Walker." Grace nodded, tears glimmering. "Yes." He leaned back, his mind racing. He could see Hannah now, her easy laughter, her soft voice, the way she'd always believed in him even when he'd been just a broke student with no plan. But he stopped, swallowing hard. "She died." Grace's eyes filled. "She did. 3 years ago. Before she died, she told me to find you one day. She said if I was ever in trouble, I should look for you, that you'd help." Daniel stared at her, the memory of Hannah's voice echoing in his head. "You're a good man, Daniel. Someday you'll help people when you least expect it." He felt dizzy. "She told you that?" "Yes," Grace said. "She said you'd never turn anyone away. I didn't even realize it was you until I heard your name in the truck." He looked past her, toward the bedroom door where the twins slept. His voice dropped to a whisper. "Grace, those kids. They're Hannah's." Grace hesitated, then nodded. "Eli and Emma. She had them after you two lost touch. Their father left before they were born. When she got sick, I promised her I'd take care of them. I tried, Daniel. I really tried, but I lost my job 2 months ago. The rent, the bills, it all fell apart." Daniel sank into a chair, his heart pounding. His mind replayed the moment he saw them on the street, how something had felt familiar about her face. "She was always the one who believed I could be better," he said quietly. "I never even knew she had kids." "She didn't talk about it much," Grace said softly. "She was afraid. But she loved them more than anything. And she was right about you. You didn't even hesitate to help us." He rubbed his hands over his face, trying to take it in. The past and present collided in his chest, the woman he'd loved and lost, and now her family sitting in his home, sleeping under his roof. Grace stepped closer, her voice trembling. "I didn't mean to find you like this. I didn't even recognize you when you stopped the truck. But maybe it wasn't an accident." Daniel looked up at her, eyes wet. "No," he said softly. "I don't think it was." For a long moment they just stood there, the quiet hum of the heater filling the silence. Snow fell heavier outside, the world bathed in white. Finally, Daniel took a slow breath and said, "You'll stay here. You and the kids. We'll figure out the rest later." Grace's eyes widened. "Daniel, I can't." He cut her off with a gentle shake of his head. "You can. It's Christmas. My son's been praying for a miracle." Tears slipped down her cheeks, and she nodded, whispering, "Thank you." He smiled faintly, glancing toward the small tree glowing in the corner. Maybe this is Hannah's way of giving one to both of us. Outside, the wind quieted. The snow kept falling, soft and endless, covering the streets and the broken pieces of their lives. Inside, for the first time in a long while, the apartment felt like home, not because of the decorations or the food, but because of the warmth that had returned to it, the kind that only comes when love finds its way back in the most unexpected form.